The night was calm, with only the soft hum of crickets breaking the silence in the small town. Officer Mark Reynolds sat in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee as he drove slowly through empty streets. The air felt unusually still, almost too quiet for a Friday evening. Most people were probably at home, enjoying dinner or watching TV. But Mark knew better than to let his guard down. Even in a peaceful town like this, trouble could be hiding just around the corner. As he turned onto Maple Street, something caught his eye under the flickering glow of a street lamp. At first, he thought it might be a stray dog, or maybe some trash blown by the wind. But then he saw movement, slow and unsteady. Squinting, Mark realized it was a person. A young girl, no older than 16, stumbled into the light. Her hair was messy, her clothes torn, and she looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Before Mark could even step out of his car, her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the cold pavement. Mark's heart raced as he rushed to her side. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, kneeling beside her. There was no response. He gently shook her shoulder, but she remained unconscious. Panic set in as he noticed the faint bruises on her arms and the dirt smudged across her face. She was so thin that her wrists looked fragile, like they might snap if squeezed too hard. Whatever had happened to her, it wasn't good. He grabbed his radio and called for backup and an ambulance. While waiting, he scanned the area, looking for anything unusual. A car speeding away, someone lurking nearby, or any clue that might explain why this girl was alone and in such bad shape. But the street was deserted. It was just him, the girl, and the eerie hum of the lamppost above them. Time seemed to crawl as the ambulance arrived, its sirens slicing through the quiet night. Paramedics quickly loaded her onto a stretcher, attaching monitors and oxygen masks. Mark climbed into the ambulance with her, refusing to leave her side until they reached the hospital. As they sped through the dark streets, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Who was she? Why was she out here all alone? And what, or who, had done this to her? At the hospital, doctors sprang into action, their faces tense with urgency. Mark stood outside the emergency room, replaying the scene in his mind. Something about the way she collapsed didn't sit right with him. It wasn't just exhaustion or hunger. It was deeper, darker. He made a silent promise to himself. No matter what it took, he would find answers. This girl deserved justice, and he wasn't going to rest until he uncovered the truth. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was tense. Nurses and doctors moved quickly, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor as they worked to stabilize the mysterious girl. She lay unconscious on a gurney, her frail body hooked up to machines that beeped rhythmically, monitoring her heartbeat and oxygen levels. Dr. Emily Carter stood at the foot of the bed, her brow furrowed as she flipped through the initial assessment notes. Something about this case didn't add up. The girl, still unidentified, was clearly malnourished. Her ribs were visible beneath her skin, and her hands were raw, as if she'd been gripping rough surfaces for days. But it wasn't just her physical condition that puzzled the medical team. There was an odd stillness about her, a fragility that went beyond exhaustion or hunger. It was almost as though her body had given up fighting long before she collapsed on the street. Dr. Carter ordered a series of tests: blood work, X-rays, and a CT scan to rule out internal injuries. As the results trickled in, one thing became clear: the girl's collapse wasn't caused by something ordinary. Her blood sugar was dangerously low, and there were signs of severe dehydration. But those weren't the only issues. The lab tech flagged something unusual in her blood work. A compound, a chemical substance, was present in her system, one that didn't match anything commonly found in routine cases. "What is this?" Dr. Carter muttered under her breath, staring at the printout. She called over a colleague, Dr. Harris, who specialized in toxicology. Together, they pored over the data, discussing possibilities in hushed tones. Whatever the substance was, it wasn't natural. It didn't belong in the human body, And yet here it was, circulating through the veins of a teenage girl who couldn't even speak for herself. Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds paced outside the emergency room, his mind racing with questions. He wanted answers, but every time he tried to ask the nurses for updates, they told him to wait. Frustrated, he leaned against the wall, replaying the moments leading up to her collapse. He remembered the bruises on her arms, the way she stumbled as though she couldn't control her own legs. Was she running from someone? Had she been attacked? Or was this something else entirely? Hours passed before Dr. Carter finally emerged from the treatment area. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. "Officer," she began, hesitating slightly, "we've identified something in her bloodstream. It's not something we see every day. In fact, I've never seen it before." Reynolds straightened up, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean? Is it dangerous?" "It could be," Dr. Carter replied cautiously. "It's synthetic, man-made, and based on what we're seeing, it's affecting her nervous system. We don't know how long she's been exposed to it, but it's definitely taking a toll on her body." The gravity of the situation hit Reynolds like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a runaway teenager who'd fallen ill. Someone, or something, had done this to her. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Who would harm a child like this? And why? As the night wore on, the mystery deepened. The girl remained unconscious, her fate uncertain. Outside, the world continued as usual, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the hospital walls. But for Dr. Carter and Officer Reynolds, the stakes had never been higher. They were dealing with more than just a sick patient. They were unraveling a puzzle that might lead them somewhere darker than they could imagine. Hours later, the girl finally stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing glassy, unfocused eyes that darted around the room as if searching for something or someone. The sterile white walls and the faint beeping of machines seemed to confuse her at first. She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak, and she sank back onto the pillow with a soft groan. Dr. Emily Carter, who had been checking her vitals, immediately moved closer, speaking in a calm, soothing voice. "It's okay," Dr. Carter said gently. "You're safe here. Can you tell me your name?" The girl hesitated, her lips trembling as though she wasn't sure whether to trust this stranger. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she murmured, "Sophia." Dr. Carter smiled warmly, trying to ease the tension. "That's a beautiful name, Sophia. Do you remember what happened to you? How did you end up on the street?" Sophia's gaze dropped to the blanket covering her legs. She fidgeted with the edge of it, her fingers tracing the folds nervously. For a moment, it seemed like she might not answer. Then, in halting sentences, she began to speak. I don't know. Everything is blurry. I think I ran away. From home. Or maybe from somewhere else." Her voice trailed off, and tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm scared." Dr. Carter exchanged a glance with Officer Reynolds, who stood quietly by the door. They both sensed there was more to her story. Details buried beneath layers of fear and confusion. But pushing too hard might shut her down completely. Instead, Dr. Carter leaned closer, her tone soft and encouraging. "Take your time, Sophia. You're safe now. No one can hurt you here." Sophia swallowed hard, her breathing shallow. "There was a man," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He said he'd help me. He promised food and shelter. But then..." She stopped abruptly, her hands clutching the blanket tighter. Her face twisted with emotion, as if reliving a nightmare she couldn't escape. "What about the man, Sophia?" Officer Reynolds asked carefully, stepping forward. His voice was steady but kind, avoiding anything that might sound accusatory. "Can you describe him? Did he do something to you?" Sophia shook her head violently, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't want to talk about it," she cried, her voice rising. "Please, just leave me alone." The outburst startled everyone in the room. Dr. Carter quickly intervened, placing a reassuring hand on Sophia's arm. "It's all right, sweetheart. You don't have to say anything right now. We're just here to help you." For several minutes, the room fell silent except for Sophia's ragged breathing. Slowly, her sobs subsided, and she wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her eyes darted toward the window, as if longing to flee, but her frail body betrayed her inability to move. Officer Reynolds decided to change tactics. "Sophia," he said softly, "do you remember where you were staying before you collapsed? Any landmarks or places you passed by?" She thought for a moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. "A basement," she muttered. It was dark and cold. There were syringes, lots of them. Her voice cracked, and she hugged herself tightly, rocking slightly as though trying to comfort her own trembling body. Dr. Carter's heart sank. Syringes. That could explain the strange compound in Sophia's blood. But why would anyone inject her with something so dangerous? And who was this man who had lured her into his trap? As Sophia drifted back into silence, exhaustion overtaking her once again, the weight of her words hung heavily in the air. Officer Reynolds clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. Whoever had done this to her wouldn't get away with it. Not on his watch. The next morning, Dr. Emily Carter arrived at the hospital early, her mind still swirling with questions about Sophia's condition. She had spent most of the night reviewing the lab results, poring over every detail in hopes of finding answers. But what she discovered only deepened the mystery and sent a chill down her spine. The synthetic compound found in Sophia's blood was unlike anything Dr. Carter had ever encountered. It wasn't listed in any medical database, nor did it match any known prescription drugs or illegal substances. The chemical structure was complex, suggesting it had been engineered for a specific purpose. What's more, the levels in Sophia's system indicated prolonged exposure. This wasn't a one-time incident. Someone had deliberately administered it to her, repeatedly, over an extended period. Dr. Carter called Dr. Harris back into the room to discuss the findings. "This isn't random," she said, pointing to the lab report. "Whoever gave her this knew exactly what they were doing. Look at these markers. It's designed to affect the nervous system. It could explain why she collapsed and why she seems so disconnected." Dr. Harris nodded grimly. "It's experimental," he said after a moment. "This kind of compound doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone is testing it on people." The implications were staggering. If Sophia was part of some kind of experiment, then she wasn't alone. There could be others like her, victims of the same sinister operation. Dr. Carter felt a wave of anger mixed with helplessness. How could someone justify using a child as a test subject? And who would have access to such advanced technology? Meanwhile, Officer Reynolds had been digging deeper into Sophia's case. When he heard about the lab results, his jaw tightened. This wasn't just a runaway teenager anymore. It was a full-blown investigation. He began by cross-referencing missing persons reports, searching for anyone matching Sophia's description. Then he reached out to local shelters and community organizations, asking if they'd seen or heard of a girl fitting her profile. His efforts led him to a name: Marcus Lyle. A man in his late 30s, Lyle had a shady reputation around town. He'd been questioned before for suspicious activities but never charged. Witnesses described him as charming yet manipulative, often targeting vulnerable teens who didn't have anywhere else to go. One shelter worker mentioned seeing Sophia with him weeks earlier, though they hadn't thought much of it at the time. Reynolds pulled up Lyle's record and showed his photo to Sophia during a brief visit. At first, she recoiled, panic flashing across her face. But when Reynolds assured her that she was safe, she nodded slowly, confirming it was him. "He promised me food," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But then he locked me in a room. He said I owed him." The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was horrifying. Reynolds shared his findings with Dr. Carter, who immediately connected the dots. "If Lyle is involved, then we're dealing with something bigger than we thought," she said. "This isn't just one man preying on kids, it's organized." That compound in her blood proves it. As the day wore on, Both Dr. Carter and Officer Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. If Lyle and whoever he worked for realized Sophia was alive and talking, they might come after her. Protecting her became their top priority. But so did uncovering the truth. Whoever was behind this operation had gone to great lengths to keep it hidden. And now, thanks to Sophia's bravery, the first cracks in their facade were beginning to show. As the investigation deepened, Officer Reynolds found himself piecing together fragments of a puzzle that grew darker with each new discovery. Armed with Sophia's identification of Marcus Lyle and the mysterious compound in her blood, he decided to dig deeper into Lyle's background. What he uncovered sent chills down his spine. Lyle wasn't just a small-time predator. He was connected to something far more sinister. A search through old police records revealed that Lyle had once worked as a janitor for a now-defunct biotech company called Genus Labs. The company had shut down years ago after allegations of unethical practices surfaced, but no charges were ever filed due to lack of evidence. Rumors persisted, however, that some of its researchers continued their work underground, conducting illegal experiments on unwilling participants. Reynolds shared this information with Dr. Carter, who immediately saw the connection. "This has to be where the compound came from," she said, pointing to Sophia's lab results. "Genus Labs must have been developing it before they went under. If someone revived their research, they'd need test subjects, people no one would miss." The thought made both of them sick to their stomachs. They realized Sophia wasn't just a victim of abuse. She was part of a horrifying experiment designed to push the boundaries of science without regard for human life. Determined to find solid proof, Reynolds obtained a warrant to search properties linked to Lyle and former employees of Genus Labs. One address stood out: a remote warehouse on the outskirts of town. It had been rented under a fake name, but utility bills traced back to Lyle. Reynolds assembled a team, knowing they might finally be closing in on the truth. Meanwhile, Sophia's condition began improving slightly. Though her emotional scars ran deep, she still flinched at sudden movements and avoided talking about her time with Lyle. But when Dr. Carter gently explained what they'd discovered about Genus Labs, Sophia nodded solemnly. "I remember hearing them talk about the project," she whispered. "They said I was special, that I'd help them finish it." Her words fueled Reynolds' resolve. He knew they were dealing with dangerous people who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who got in their way. Protecting Sophia became paramount, so she was moved to a secure location under constant guard. Still, the fear in her eyes reminded everyone involved how high the stakes truly were. When the raid on the warehouse took place, what the officers found inside confirmed their worst suspicions. Rows of makeshift beds lined the walls, along with crates filled with medical supplies. In one corner, they discovered a locked freezer containing vials of the same synthetic compound found in Sophia's blood. Notes scrawled on clipboards detailed dosages and reactions. Cold, clinical observations treating human beings like lab rats. But the most shocking discovery came when they found two other teenagers hidden in a back room, terrified and malnourished. Like Sophia, they bore the physical and emotional toll of prolonged captivity. When questioned, they recounted stories eerily similar to hers. Promises of help, followed by betrayal and imprisonment. With the evidence mounting, Reynolds arrested Lyle and several accomplices tied to the operation. Yet even as handcuffs clicked around their wrists, Reynolds couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't caught everyone. Someone higher up, the mastermind behind these experiments, was still out there, lurking in the shadows. For Sophia, the arrests brought a mix of relief and fear. While justice felt closer than ever, the scars of her ordeal would take years to heal. But for the first time since collapsing on that cold street, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. Perhaps with the support of those who cared for her, she could begin to rebuild her shattered life. As the days passed, Sophia began to open up more about her time with Marcus Lyle and the nightmare she had endured. Dr. Carter and Officer Reynolds listened intently, piecing together the fragments of her story while ensuring she felt safe and supported. It wasn't easy. Sophia often paused mid-sentence, her voice trembling or breaking entirely as memories flooded back. But each detail she shared brought them closer to understanding the full scope of the horrors she had faced. I didn't trust him at first, Sophia admitted during one session, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. But he acted so nice, like he cared. He said no one else would help me. Her voice cracked, and tears welled up in her eyes. He gave me food and let me stay in his house for a few days. Then everything changed. Dr. Carter leaned forward gently. What happened, Sophia? You can tell us. Sophia took a shaky breath. One night, he told me we were going somewhere safe, a place where I wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. But when we got there, it was just a basement, dark and cold. There were other kids there too, but they looked scared, like me. She paused, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. That's when he started giving me those shots. Every day, sometimes twice a day. He said it was medicine, that it would make me stronger. But it made me feel worse. My head hurt all the time, and I couldn't think straight. Officer Reynolds clenched his fists under the table, forcing himself to stay calm. The cruelty of what Sophia described was almost unbearable to hear. Yet he knew how important it was to let her speak, to give her the chance to confront her trauma in her own way. He kept saying I was special. Sophia continued, her voice barely above a whisper, that I was helping them finish something big. But I didn't understand what he meant. All I knew was that I wanted to leave. So one day, when he forgot to lock the door, I ran. Her courage amazed everyone in the room. Despite the fear and pain, Sophia had found the strength to escape. But her journey hadn't ended there. Running through unfamiliar streets, weak and disoriented from the drugs in her system, she had collapsed right before Officer Reynolds found her. The more Sophia revealed, the clearer it became that this operation was far-reaching and meticulously planned. The logo on the syringes, the snake coiled around a dagger, had been etched into her memory. When Reynolds showed her images of Genus Labs' old branding, she nodded immediately. That's it, she said, pointing to the emblem. I saw it everywhere. With this confirmation, Reynolds intensified his efforts to track down anyone still connected to Genus Labs. His team combed through financial records, phone logs, and property deeds, uncovering a web of connections leading to a man named Victor Hargrove. A former lead scientist at Genus Labs, Hargrove had disappeared after the company's closure, but resurfaced years later under an alias, operating a string of shell companies involved in pharmaceutical research. Reynolds knew Hargrove was the key to unraveling the entire operation. If they could prove he was behind the experiments, they might finally bring the whole network crashing down. Meanwhile, Sophia's testimony provided critical evidence linking Lyle and his accomplices to the illegal trials. But even as progress was made, Sophia struggled with lingering fears. Nightmares plagued her sleep, and she often woke up screaming, convinced that Lyle or someone else from her past was coming for her. Dr. Carter worked tirelessly to reassure her, reminding her that she was safe now and surrounded by people who cared deeply about her recovery. For the first time, however, Sophia allowed herself to imagine a future beyond the darkness. With each passing day, she grew stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. And though the road ahead would be long, she began to believe that healing was possible. The breakthrough came when Officer Reynolds and his team traced the money trail back to Victor Hargrove. It turned out that Hargrove had been funneling funds through offshore accounts to finance his illegal experiments. With the help of federal agents, Reynolds obtained a warrant to raid Hargrove's current residence, a sprawling estate hidden deep in the woods. The location was isolated, making it the perfect hideout for someone conducting secretive and dangerous work. On the day of the raid, tensions ran high. Officers surrounded the property, their flashlights cutting through the dense fog that blanketed the area. Inside the house, they found evidence that confirmed their worst fears. Rooms filled with lab equipment, stacks of documents detailing human trials, and more vials of the synthetic compound. In one chilling discovery, they uncovered video footage of Sophia and other victims being injected with the substance, their reactions carefully recorded by cameras mounted on the walls. Hargrove himself was nowhere to be found at first, but a quick search revealed him attempting to flee through a hidden tunnel beneath the house. When officers dragged him out, his calm demeanor shattered as he realized the extent of their investigation. "You'll never prove anything," he sneered, though sweat dripped from his forehead. His arrogance only fueled the determination of those working to bring him down. Back at the station, Hargrove's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. News outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the horrors perpetrated by Genus Labs and its rogue scientists. Public outrage grew as details emerged about the exploitation of vulnerable teens like Sophia. Families of other victims came forward, seeking answers about loved ones who had gone missing without explanation. For Sophia, seeing Hargrove behind bars brought a mix of emotions. Relief washed over her knowing that the man responsible for her suffering could no longer harm anyone else. But confronting the reality of what she'd endured also reopened old wounds. During therapy sessions with Dr. Carter, she often broke down, struggling to reconcile the trauma of her past with the hope of a brighter future. Dr. Carter encouraged Sophia to take things one step at a time. "Healing isn't linear," she explained gently. "There will be good days and bad days. What matters is that you're here, fighting for yourself." To help her cope, Sophia began attending support group meetings for survivors of abuse and exploitation. At first, she hesitated to share her story, feeling unworthy of the kindness others extended to her. But as she listened to their experiences, she realized she wasn't alone. Slowly, she started opening up, finding strength in the shared bond of survival. Officer Reynolds remained a constant presence in Sophia's life, checking in regularly to ensure her safety. He also worked closely with social services to find her a stable foster family willing to provide the care and support she desperately needed. For the first time in years, Sophia felt like she might have a real home again. As justice slowly unfolded, the pieces of Sophia's life began falling into place. She still had nightmares and certain triggers, like seeing a siren or hearing footsteps in the hallway, sent her spiraling back to her darkest moments. But she learned coping strategies, leaning on Dr. Carter, her support group, and even Reynolds when the weight of her past felt too heavy to bear. By the time Hargrove's trial began, Sophia had gained enough confidence to testify against him. Standing in the courtroom, her voice steady despite her nerves, she recounted every harrowing detail of her ordeal. The jury listened intently, visibly moved by her courage. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, a wave of relief swept over everyone involved in the case. Though the scars of her experience would always remain, Sophia allowed herself to believe that justice had been served. And for the first time since collapsing on that cold street months earlier, she dared to dream of a life where she wasn't defined by her pain, but by her resilience. Months had passed since the trial, and Sophia's life began to transform in ways she never thought possible. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they no longer controlled her. She learned to ground herself when memories threatened to overwhelm her, focusing on the sound of her breath, the warmth of sunlight streaming through her window, or the comforting hum of music playing softly in the background. With each small victory, she felt more like herself again. Her foster family played a big role in her recovery. They weren't perfect, but they were kind and patient, giving Sophia the space she needed while also reminding her that she wasn't alone. At first, she kept to herself, unsure how to trust anyone after everything she'd been through. But over time, their quiet gestures of love, a warm meal on the table, a gentle knock on her door before entering, an invitation to join them for a movie night, began to chip away at the walls she built around her heart. One evening, as they sat together laughing over dessert, Sophia realized something remarkable. She felt safe. For so long, safety had seemed like an impossible dream, but now it was her reality. Dr. Carter continued to check in with her regularly, not just as her doctor, but as a mentor and friend. "You've come so far, Sophia," she said during one of their sessions. "Don't forget to celebrate the progress you've made." Sophia nodded, smiling shyly. It was hard to believe sometimes, But she could see the changes in herself too. Her hands no longer shook when she walked into crowded rooms. She could look people in the eye without flinching. And slowly, she was learning to let go of the guilt she'd carried for so long, the misplaced belief that she deserved what had happened to her. Officer Reynolds became a steady presence in her life as well. He visited often, bringing updates about the case and sharing stories from his own experiences. "You're stronger than you think, kid," he told her once, his voice gruff but warm. "You survived things most people wouldn't have. That makes you pretty incredible." His words stayed with her, tucked away in her mind like a lifeline whenever self-doubt crept in. Sophia decided to honor her journey by helping others who might be going through similar struggles. She joined a community outreach program aimed at supporting runaway teens and victims of exploitation. At first, she listened more than she spoke, drawing strength from the resilience of those around her. But eventually, she found her voice, sharing bits of her story to encourage others to keep fighting. Seeing the impact she had on even one person filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt before. One crisp spring morning, Sophia stood outside the courthouse where Hargrove had been sentenced. The air smelled fresh, tinged with the promise of new beginnings. Officer Reynolds stood beside her, his hands in his pockets as he gazed up at the building. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" he asked quietly. Sophia nodded, her eyes soft but steady. "It does," she replied. "I used to think I'd never escape all of this, but standing here today, I feel like maybe I can do anything." As they walked away together, the sun casting long shadows behind them, Sophia allowed herself to imagine the future, not with fear, but with hope. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but for the first time, she was ready to face it head-on. The scars would always be part of her story, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they reminded her of how far she'd come, and how much farther she could go. And so, step by step, Sophia moved forward, carrying with her the lessons of her past and the unshakable belief that she was worthy of love, peace, and happiness. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew she wasn't walking it alone anymore.